said, in saying that intelligence is an absolutely critical factor in prevention. I'm a member of a civilian organization, a nonprofit, not law enforcement, and I've noted that many of the law enforcement agencies are prevented from even collecting news clips about extremist groups if there isn't reason to believe that there is actual unlawful activity taking place or imminently taking place. And so when something like this happens, unfortunately, it often means there's a scramble after the fact to try to collect as much information as possible. I hope that with proper attention being paid to civil liberties, better efforts can be made at collecting intelligence about domestic extremist groups or groups operating in this country which are fronts for international terrorists.
How significant is the increase of these groups? How many, how fast? Are they rising, rapidly?
Well, on the extreme right, not all groups are white supremacists. Many of these militias, by the way, are not necessarily white supremacists. It's the anti-government sentiment that drives them. But there are white supremacist groups as well on the far right. We've seen, in general, a decline in the number of people associated with far-right groups, neo-Nazi groups, the Ku Klux Klan, for example. But what that has tended to mean is that those who have remained in those groups tend to be the more hardcore ideological supporters and the ones who might be willing to engage in terrorist types of activities.
Charlie, I just want to make a quick comment on what Tom said. 20 years ago, both the New York City Police Department, most large city police departments, and the FBI were the victims of a lot of litigation, because we used to put deep undercovers, as we call them, into these radical groups to monitor their activities. And as Tom said, there was no evidence of any specific crime. As a result of a lot of litigation, we were prohibited from doing that. So we now have to wait. Law enforcement basically waits till the crime is committed before we're able to get close to any of these radical groups.
Yes. Can I offer a dissenter's view on
Yes.
this? I want viewers to recognize that part of the problem here has been an aggressive law enforcement response, and that these radical right-wingers have found symbols in two cases in which we could argue about Waco and Weaver all night, but there seems little question that those were both aggressive responses by the government to a perceived threat. In the Weaver case, I would say no real threat at all. And so when government has been empowered to investigate these things or be too aggressive, the consequence has sometimes been that we've created martyrs for these right-wingers. And when you go out and talk to these people about and they tell you why the government is evil and satanic and all the rest, they have some evidence for their...
So Waco and the Branch Davidians are a rallying cry for these?
Oh, absolutely.
For sure.
And Randy Weaver as well.
the white supremacist in Idaho, who was being sought for charges of selling a sawed-off shotgun, something like a quarter of an inch too short on the barrel.
And the Justice
It's also regarded as a martyr. But
was he represented by Jerry Spence?
That's right.
He was.
One thing, though, I want to piggyback on what Phil was saying is that while they regard the federal law enforcement response in those cases as egregious and as perhaps evidence of a federal government run amok, they fail to recognize that there was tremendous criticism within the federal government, from Congress, from the administration, against certain elements of how those cases were handled, and they regard them not as perhaps aberrations, but as business as usual. They say this is the evidence that government will stop at nothing to impose its tyrannical will on the American people, and this is what dissenters can expect every time from here on in from the ATF
So
and the
therefore,
FBI.
what will be the response of the groups?
Well,
I mean, if they use that as a rallying cry, and let's assume they use it to proselytize and gain new members,
Correct.
if that's their interest.
That's precisely what it is.
Then what do they want to do, though? What's their objective?
Well, maybe the case that we're seeing unfolding in Oklahoma City will provide some of those answers. Because until now, we have been seeing from militia groups and similar types of groups a lot of belligerent talk about how the federal government is hell-bent on a war against the citizenry, but the literature usually casts themselves, the militias, in sort of a defensive posture. It's like, we'll be ready. We're going to arm ourselves and we'll be ready for when the war comes. But nobody could really say just what they intended to do with all these weapons that they were collecting.
Are you surprised, I mean, of the enormity of this crime?
Absolutely.
Not in terms of the consequences, people, I mean, clearly you are, but they would take a bomb like this and put it outside of a federal building and blow it up.
Well, I think as Bob said, we're going to have to wait and see if through interviews with the people who are being interviewed by law enforcement, we can come up with some specifics about motives. But certainly the literature has been talking about war. But the fact...
But has the literature also been talking about, and you can jump in, Jim and Bob, has the literature been talking about making strikes, offensive strikes against government offices and government employees?
It has, Charlie, I would point out that in '86 in northern Idaho, there were several bombings of government buildings by individuals who were associated with organizations that apparently share something of the ideology. So it's happened before. There were no deaths on that occasion, but they have on other occasions, some of these groups have advocated violence against federal officials and federal property.
Before the 1986 cases in Coeur d'Alene, which involved a group called the Bruderschweigen Strike Force II, stands for Silent Brotherhood, German for Silent Brotherhood. There was a group active in '83, '84 called the Order, which this '86 group was piggybacking on, and they are the group, the neo-Nazi group that killed Alan Berg, the radio host in Denver, and committed a number of armored car robberies in the West. They got their strategy out of a white supremacist novel called The Turner Diaries by William Pierce.
You're familiar with it?
Which is kind of the Bible of the Michigan militia, as I understand
Well,
it. Tell them the plot of
what
that
is it
now.
about this?
It's about a white racist revolution in this country. And in the novel, ultimately successful.
And what's the book's title?
It's called The Turner Diaries. And ominously, it includes a plan carried out in the novel for an ammonium nitrate bomb detonated at the FBI headquarters in Washington at 9:15 in the morning. And other plans, they eventually detonated atomic bombs on a number of eastern cities. And of course, this fits in with the Aryan view of where certain types of people live in this country. Finally, they nuked Tel Aviv. And there were also plans in the novel concerning blowing up power grids and urban water supplies in metropolitan centers in this country. And these are ideas that various extremist groups have talked about carrying out.
To Phil's point about the government being an aggressor or being viewed as aggressive, I mean, you really have to understand that they're paranoid about the government. The government has been criticized for not being aggressive enough. I mean, Crice was stockpiling large numbers of weapons. These people committed this crime. They all have, you know, a tremendous cache of weapons when anybody goes near them.
So when Armageddon comes, they're ready, huh?
Yeah, but I think from the perspective of lawful government, we have to be very realistic. They are potentially very dangerous, as they proved.
That's right. We saw something on the news just before we began at the table here about how the Attorney General Reno wanted to make sure that her people spent all the time necessary with the paperwork involving some of these people who have been taken into custody, making sure
they
that
had the right search warrant.
all done properly, precisely to uphold the civil libertarian concepts that our Constitution provides for. It's really an irony here, because the militias say that the federal government is trampling on the Constitution, and they are the defenders of the Constitution against the federal government. But in fact, and they're talking about how the government is running amok, and it's on this inevitable course. But we had a considerable change of course last November, which, whether you approve of it or not, is certainly evidence that the people still have the power to change their government. We still have the democratic forces in place that these militia groups say we've lost.
Would I be correct in assuming that the FBI, for one, has known about these groups, certainly after Waco became even more sensitive to it, and probably are infiltrating them and probably have a lot of intelligence about them?
Probably not. Actually, Charlie, the FBI has tracked some of these groups and arrested some of the members, but the federal agency that are probably more involved with the groups is ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and that's because of the guns violations, and they just go head-to-head so often. They're both very aggressive, and that's how so many of these confrontations begin.
Wait, say that. I'm sure I don't understand the confrontation between.
Well, ATF is an aggressive agency.
Right.
The militias are aggressive. They're not going to have their toes walked on, and when they come together, sometimes
But would the ATF be sharing their information with the FBI?
when necessary, when appropriate. You know, if it's an ATF violation, there's no need for them to share it with the FBI.
Okay.
But to get back to the point, unless the government, any agency, the FBI, ATF, local police, have probable cause to believe that a crime is being committed, they can't put in what we would call a deep undercover, somebody who's truly, you know, not identifiable as a federal or law enforcement agent, and to just track or surveil or monitor or hang around, which is what we did in the old days with the student groups and the others.
With the Ku Klux Klan and,
Right.
and
we,
Mississippi and
we
other
just
places.
put agents in for 4 and 5 years. Now, there are dangers to that. There are civil liberties dangers. There are all kinds of dangers. The fact is the government doesn't have the capacity to do that anymore.
Many of the militia groups that have set themselves up around the country aren't necessarily yet, at least, engaging in paramilitary style training. Much of it is simply distribution of literature, making speeches, First Amendment protected kinds of talk. And some of them gets into very far out kinds of conspiracy theories, some including anti-Semitism
Well, I
and
was going to get to that.
racism.
Are they, most of them anti-Semitic, and do most of them look on Hitler as some kind of hero because of
As for the militias, most of them are not. Some of them have members who have ties with anti-Semitic and racist extremist groups, including the Aryan Nations. Most of them, from what the ADL has been able to determine in our investigations, do not. It's the fierce anti-government sentiment. But they still sometimes buy into similar kinds of conspiratorial notions.
Why
Phil
is the
was
ADL
talking about
that'll come
one
right to you,
world
Phil.
government, new world order.
Here, I'm showing an ADL fact-finding report, Armed and Dangerous Militias Take Aim at the Federal Government. What's the ADL's interest in this?
Well, the Anti-Defamation League's main interest, as many people know, is concerning racial and religious
Right,
bigotry,
understand.
but not only. Throughout our 80-year history, we have also regarded anti-democratic forces as suitable movements for exposure to the American people so that they can understand what they're dealing with and ultimately reject them. And this is at its core an anti-democratic
Based on
movement.
your experience, is anything we're missing here?
I would say so. I mean, I think that the danger that you get when you get 5 people from a pretty urban environment sitting around a table talking about this is that there is, I think, if not sympathy, there's fertile ground out there for some of this thinking.
For what, the thinking?
Well, I think that what we have to remember is that I suspect that in the end, these guys are going to be prove to be very alienated and angry young men. Yeah. But that generally they come from a group that are sort of lifestyle losers. And a lot of the people in the West who are not going and bombing buildings, who are not violating gun laws, are lifestyle losers now. They're losing their Second Amendment freedoms, which they are. I mean, we are, and I support that as a sort of First Amendment advocate, but the Second Amendment is being chipped away. They're losing some of their access to federal lands. The snail darter, in their view, is being valued more than their ability to pick huckleberries and take deer. And I think there's a lot of people out there who regard the federal government as the enemy. They see tax as confiscatory. It goes back to the John Birch Society, and so there's fertile ground for belief in one world government, in the government coming in a very arbitrary and brutal fashion to trample their individual rights. And when a Weaver case comes along or a Waco, they have evidence for it. And not everyone is going to respond by bashing out at the federal government.
But have they, let's assume there's some connection here. Have they taken it to an extreme that even within, you said that they were applauding in terms of the woman who knew something about the Michigan militia, there was an elation about
publicity that was coming.
Well, they said the bombing was good because there would be enormous publicity for them and it would be a rallying cry to gain new members.
Well, I think there may be some, well, I think that there may be support that we are not aware of. One of the comments I ran into out in Idaho was someone saying that there are people who go along with the government are the sheeple. You're the sheep-type people, the sheeple. And they were saying of me, you're a sheep-type person because you believe Waco's an aberration and the government is generally benevolent. And I think there's a broad stream of humanity, or maybe a narrow, but a stream of humanity out there that thinks that the government is really out to get us.
2 things I want to do. One is the notion of, there was some early report today, and since you were there part of the broadcast all day, and you may have been too, Bob, I haven't been watching television, it was that they were reported to be AWL.
I think that was a false report. I think there is some evidence to support the fact that they originally met in the Army, became buddies in the Army, and remained buddies after Army life. The fact that they were veterans, that they were demolition trained, I think that's been proven erroneous.
What else can you tell us about McViegh and about, what's the other guy's name? Nichols. What do we know about him? I mean, in terms of...
We don't know a whole lot because this thing is broken so recently, and of course, if the reports are true that they are cooperating, there's going to be a lot of information that will be forthcoming.
Yeah.
I think you have to be careful about the word cooperating. They could be cooperating and denying that they had anything to do with it, and in effect are saying, I know what happened, but I didn't do it. So I'm not sure they're confessing to the crime right now. We don't know.
The nature of the explosion. I'm told that the ingredients and the capacity to make this explosion was explained on the internet.
Well, it's been explained
Yes.
so many times in magazines and newspapers after the World Trade Center bombing, a very similar type bomb.
This was a
And
similar type bomb as World Trade Center?
something devious about whoever planted that bomb in Oklahoma City, almost trying to make the fingerprint of that bomb point to the Muslims, because there were the similarity. The yellow Ryder truck, almost identical to the delivery vehicle at the World Trade Center. The ammonium nitrate bomb, fertilizer and fuel oil, basically, as in the World Trade Center. The size of the bomb, 1,200 pounds there. This one was obviously an enormous bomb. And I just wonder if that wasn't another devious part of the plot, point the finger at the Muslims.
And let me bring this point up then. Was the first indication that this was not the expression being used around media today, that there was no Middle East connection, was the first indication when you realized that these were Caucasian Americans, the notion, because Hezbollah or a radical fundamentalist would never go outside of their own known.
Well, they may or may not, but certainly the visceral reaction of law enforcement people was when they saw the composite sketches, this may
not a Middle East connection.
This may not be Middle East connection.
Because there's no evidence that Middle Eastern terrorists, in any way connected with the Middle East, have ever used contractors.
There was also skepticism about the location in terms of the Middle Eastern connection.
Why
a lot
Oklahoma
of people
City?
say, why Oklahoma City? I mean, maybe L.A., maybe Chicago, maybe New York, but it was hard to figure out why they would target Oklahoma unless it was a weaker target.
Yeah, I've asked this before, but I'll ask it again since it's in the context now. Why Oklahoma City? What's the speculation about Oklahoma City?
Again, I don't, nobody knows. I certainly don't know, but I keep hearkening back to the fact, federal office building, ATF offices,
Well,
they're taking our
that's
guns
true,
away.
and that's probably true in Dallas and Tulsa and a lot of other places, isn't it?
You know, Bob mentioned earlier they might have been driving through town and said, hey, let's set a bomb off. I mean, it's not that simple, of course, but they may have tried to make this thing and say, well,
They
we
can't
got it
ascribe
made.
magical powers to every aspect of their planning.
Now, let me just go around the table here and ask this question. What questions are being unanswered today, and what questions are being asked today by the people that you know, because you have had the journalistic experience you've had?
Well, I think the questions that I really want to hear the answers to are how much of their thinking these guys, if they prove to be
Whoever did it.
Yeah. How much of their thinking is on a continuum with this sort of Christian patriot beliefs that are sort of widely out there and that even Pat Robertson has espoused to some degree.
Questions,
Although very different from the militias.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
questions that I would think of, first of all, are if these are the people who are involved in the delivery of the explosive, who's behind? Were there other people pulling the strings? Did they have a greater network? Yeah. In addition to that, I would ask, was there money involved, and where does the network lead to?
I think some of the questions that have to be asked and answered now, and it's going to be a public debate, is what are the implications for this going forward? Are we going to have to reduce our liberties in order to secure our safety?
Has terrorism come to the shores of the United
Exactly,
States?
both international and
We knew it had
domestic.
the World Trade Center, but now that was not an aberration. We've seen it twice now.
Yeah, and I think that this has had a much more profound impact on our collective psyche than the World Trade Center for a lot of reasons. One, the bombing took place in New York, which has always been viewed as a somewhat separate part of the United States, not the heartland, as they say. So it was the first incident. We caught the perpetrators very quickly and arrested and convicted them and imprisoned them. And here you had the children killed, which was just terribly traumatic for this country. So I think you may see
the number of deaths was so
tremendous.
significant.
Yeah, and I think you may see some institutional change in the context of security, the way we do it at airports now. You may see that at federal buildings, commercial buildings.
And people
in the
even
future.
talking about closing down Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House now. What questions are your...
I have to follow on Bob's theme. I've done a lot of TV interviews since Wednesday morning, and I think every single one has included the question, how can we protect ourselves? Are we totally vulnerable now? Usually thinking, are we vulnerable to international terrorism? and you can give them some answers, but it sure doesn't soothe them very much because they've seen 2 horrible events now, and just shows that people can carry it
And to be
on.
honest, you can't assure them, can you?
No, you can't.
Joe, you were alluding to this bomb before, and what we didn't mention is that it's a cliche at this point, but how easy it was to manufacture.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I thank you for coming in. The death toll continues as they find more bodies. The largest, by far, incident of this kind. We will continue to follow the story next week. Coming up, a dramatic, for us, change of pace. We'll introduce you to 4 young men who are having remarkable success in the world of music. Boys to Men. Back in a moment. Stay with us. 4 young men from the same high school in Philadelphia make up the hottest act in pop music. Fans bought more than 8 million copies of the group's debut album, Cooley High Harmony. Their hit single, End of the Road, topped the charts in 1992 for, count them, 13 weeks, breaking a record set by Elvis Presley. And in December 1994, 2-time Grammy winners Boyz II Men bumped themselves out of the top spot when one single from their current album replaced another. Only Presley and the Beatles had done that before. Joining me now, group founder Nate Morris, Sean Stockman, bass Michael McCary, and Wanya Morris. And I'm pleased to have all of you here. Welcome.
Thank you.
Did I get it right? Wanya.
Wanya.
Tell me how it all began. Did you two, how this all began for you?
Well, actually, I guess the idea for Boyz II Men, or for a group in general, started in 1980.
What we saw in the news was the execution date of a white supremacist by the name of Richard Wayne Snell in Arkansas. I spoke with his lawyer this afternoon, and he said that Richard went to his death knowing of the bombing and that he, quote, was appalled by what had been done and would in no way condone that act.
Let me turn to Victoria Tunsing, who is a former Assistant Attorney General who created the anti-terrorism unit at the Justice Department. I had always heard, Victoria, that the FBI was on top of these paramilitary groups, had infiltrated them. Given that, how could a bombing like this happen? I mean, there must have been a lot of activity associated with it.
Well, not necessarily. Maybe 3 or 4 or 5 people could have put this together, Fred. The FBI it really has done an excellent job of investigation. We are so good at investigating. We are not too great at preventing, and that's because we have a free society, and there are all kinds of protections. There's an outgrowth of the anti-war movement in the 1960s and 70s. There are now lots of guidelines and prohibitions on the FBI as far as infiltrating certain groups who are just expressing their First Amendment rights.
Would you recommend that these inhibitions on the FBI be lifted?
Not, of course not entirely. I think there's always time for a discussion to see where something is falling through the cracks and evaluating it. I hate to do it, though, whenever we have some kind of incident like this. Wouldn't it be nice to do it with quiet reflection?
But that may not work. That's the problem.
Let me go back here for a second, because I want to follow up on something that Kevin Flynn mentioned. Kevin, you said that when Richard Snell went to his death a few days ago, he said he knew of the bombing and was appalled. Now, do you mean that you think he had, or his attorney thinks he had, prior knowledge to this? Does that raise then the question, or if not, do you think this was a conspiracy involving other militia groups in other states, or do you think it's possible these 2 people, if in fact, and this is alleged now, and we don't know, in fact, whether they really were members of the Michigan militia. Right, we should keep that in mind. But do you think that if this is a militia movement activity, that this is an isolated incident or a conspiracy?
I think it's isolated in the sense that the militia in general won't be going out and taking these actions as an organized group, but there will be people around the edges who want to take it further, and that's exactly what happened in the mid-'80s. If I could jump on that other point, in the 80s, infiltration by the federal government did lead to prevention. There were bombings in Seattle that were forestalled because groups had been infiltrated. Now the rules have changed a little bit, and as I mentioned before, the groups are broader now, and it's harder to keep tabs on everybody who's involved in this.
Well, Kevin, let me follow with this then. How broad is broad? How many people do you think in the United States are actively involved in the militia movement, either defensively or offensively?
Well, you know, they don't
thousands?
give out numbers. No, definitely thousands, probably in the low tens of thousands, something on the, I've seen estimates in the order of 20,000 people.
But that doesn't matter. I mean, what we're talking about here is we have a criminal conspiracy going on, and a conspiracy doesn't have to be very broad. All it has to be is two persons to become a criminal conspiracy, and we have allegations that we have at least that many people. We don't know if they're the exact people that are arrested yet.
Yeah, but these are paramilitary groups. What do you think about the number? Kevin Flynn said maybe 10,000 or more. Are there that many?
There could be. I mean, who knows who calls himself
well,
a
I was hoping you and the FBI might know.
Well, the FBI might know, but Kevin doesn't know. There's not a membership list. That's the whole problem. That's the issue, Fred.
Most of these people are not going to give you problems. Most of these people are going to obey the law. They believe in the rule of law, and they think that the United States is losing that battle, and they're losing those freedoms. Most of those people will not go out and commit these kinds of crimes. That's what drives people out of the group and has them doing these kinds of acts.
This is what terrorism groups do. I mean, how do we talk about them? We're talking about them on the fringe, aren't we? So we have terrorists that are part of religious organizations. The religious organization would never consider any kind of violence, but it's the fringe people who are doing it.
Okay, when we repeat one more time, though, again, there's no yet firm evidence that the militia movement in any way was involved with this, or the militia from Michigan specifically. Fred?
Well, we're going to take a break now, and when we come back, we'll be joined by Russ Ballant, who is an expert on the Michigan militia.
Their information, quite frankly, that they had was that there may have been some destructive devices there. That's why the intensity, that's why we had the overcautiousness. You saw, all of you, from the choppers and your cohorts, the number of people that were there. Certainly that was due to precautionary measurements regarding information that there could have been some explosive devices on that property.
If you've ever dreamed of staying in a place where it felt like the whole hotel was put there just to support you, then this must be the place. Radisson.
Before you buy the all-new Lincoln Continental, we suggest you give a second opinion. And a third. And fourth opinion. Drive the new V8-powered Lincoln Continental, and we think you'll share our opinion that it's the perfect balance of luxury and technology.
Rodin never really said what he was thinking about.
I think he's thinking, how did this happen? 3 drinks and I'm nude.
It's very clear.
Castle Rock Entertainment presents Billy Crystal and Deborah Winger in a comedy about love after marriage.
You know, the longest I lived with anybody before this was 8 hours.
Our love is here.
Forget Paris. Rated PG-13. At theaters May 19th.
The National Business Employment Weekly, the only publication that updates you weekly on top jobs available regionally and nationwide. All kinds of jobs, professional, managerial, technical. And you'll learn how to land one of those jobs. Get 8 job-packed issues for just $35. Also get absolutely free the Job Search Guide. Call 800-336-1111. That's 800-336-1111. The National Business Employment Weekly. If you're not looking here, you're hardly looking.
What makes Century 21 #1? Actual stories like this one.
Dear Century 21, I was awaiting quintuplets when we listed our home. Crice helped us get the house ready for showing and kept me constantly informed. Even organized a diaper drive. She went far beyond the call of duty, and so did I. Instead of 5 babies, we had 6. Sincerely, Keith and Becky Dilly, and Brenna, Julian, Quinn, Claire, Ian, and
Century 21, rated #1.
I'm Lauren Sidney. Next week, former King of the Ring Mike Tyson sees his life story hit the tube. Also, director John Carpenter remakes the thriller Village of the Damned. That's Showbiz today at 10:30 p.m. Eastern on CNN.
What we will do in cases like this is exactly what we did today. We will vigorously pursue the evidence wherever it takes us. The investigation is still early. Many of our findings are preliminary. We have a long way to go to complete the final resolutions.
Welcome back to Crossfire. Our subject, the arrest of one Michigan militia member, and the interrogation of 2 others in the bombing of the Oklahoma City Federal Building. Their detention has put the spotlight on extremist paramilitary groups across America. Joining us from Detroit is writer Russ Bellant, an expert on the Michigan militia from Eastern Michigan University. From Denver, Kevin Flynn, a Rocky Mountain News reporter and author of The Secret Brotherhood, and Victoria Tunsing, who created the Justice Department's Anti-Terrorism Unit. Bob?
Okay, let me ask you right away, Russ Bellant. Both Terry Lynn Nichols and Tomothy McViegh have been identified by only sources as being members of the Michigan militia. Have you ever heard of these 2 people, and do you have any information that they were in fact members?
I haven't heard of them, and I don't have any information to that effect. And I'd be a little surprised if they were members. The Michigan militia itself denies any knowledge of these individuals, and given the nature of the Michigan militia, I tend to believe that.
Okay, you say the nature of them. You've been in their meetings, you've followed them. Tell us about them.
Well, the Michigan militia is a public organization. They seek to recruit people openly through forums, through explaining their views, and any activity that would be of an underground or paramilitary nature would be left to other groups. They have contact with underground groups, but I think that the public nature of their organization would discourage people who are going to do the kind of heinous acts that were committed in Oklahoma from participating.
Russ, am I wrong, or do they not call themselves, don't they have a chain of command? They have lieutenants, they have a colonel, they have 4 different areas of the state. They go out on paramilitary exercises? I mean,
That's right.
I don't know whether you want to call that a civic group. In my neighborhood, that ain't a civic group.
I didn't mean to imply that they're a civic group. They're a paramilitary group. They're public in that their activities are public. You can attend them. And I would be surprised if somebody who was going to do this kind of act would be showing up in public meetings. That's all I meant to say. But there are other underground militia groups in Michigan. The Michigan militia is the name of a specific organization. And
Russ, I want to ask you, and then Kevin Flynn, whether this may be true, that these paramilitary groups who claim to be defensive are now turning to offense. What about it?
Well, they have stated in manuals and in other places that they are preparing for a military confrontation with the government. They believe that the system is unremittingly evil, needs to be challenged, and that they need to build a military force to do it. And so I think it was only a matter of time. I wasn't surprised that this kind of action occurred, that the symbolism of Waco, and I think there's more to come.
Kevin, what about it? Are they going on offense?
Well, it is precisely because the overall structure, the overall public groups advertise themselves as defensive in nature that the people who desire more action and more direct conflict leave them and do other things or never join them in full-fledged membership. It's precisely for that reason, because they are defensive in nature.
But it would seem that these are the very kinds of groups that the FBI could easily infiltrate if they're meeting in public and they have, I don't know how the membership is acquired, maybe they even have a roster and you sign up and pay $5 a year or whatever. I mean,
well, I think the fact that they've been targeted so quickly by the investigators, I think, is evidence that they have been infiltrated to a degree. It's very direct evidence. Within 48 hours, you have this action.
Well, but let me bring Russ Bellant back in. Russ, these people, one of their big arguments is gun control, right? That they say the Brady bill and doing away with semi-automatic weapons. And yet these are the same people that take these weapons into the woods expecting a confrontation. Why in the world, then, would that make a good case for doing away with gun control? I mean, I think after the American people see these people marching around there, their big issue is doing away with gun control laws. I think it's a good case for keeping gun control laws.
Well, it seems so, and their acquisition of lethal weapons, they justify not only the weapons that were banned, but weapons well beyond that. The arsenals that have been created, and these militias, of course, have been around for many years. The Michigan militia and some other recent ones around the country have gained publicity recently.
Well,
but
when you say
30 years of these groups.
Russ, when you say building up arsenals, we're talking thousands of weapons. We're talking about automatic weapons, and as I understand, in some cases, mortars. Is that right?
That's right.
And
they sweet crowd.
Let me ask Victoria Tunsing about who is at risk from these groups. Do you think the president's threatened?
Well, of course, if you've got a paramilitary organization that's upset with the government, that's just a breeding ground for somebody who's going to go off the edge. Whether, I don't care if it's right wing or left wing. I mean,
Sure.
it doesn't matter.
Well, the president jogs every day. Should he stop that? He jogs in public. I see him.
Yeah, but none of us, as soon as we all stop changing our behavior to that degree, then all of these people have won, haven't they? Because they've taken away our basic liberties.
You know, there's a novel by one of these paramilitary guys in West Virginia about a car bomb or truck bomb blowing up the FBI building on Pennsylvania Avenue. Well, I drive down Pennsylvania Avenue practically every day. A truck bomb could easily get close to that building.
Actually, that building was constructed so that it was bomb-proof.
Okay, yeah, listen, I don't want you to lose sleep tonight, but let me go back and ask Kevin Flynn a question. Kevin, this was a very big bomb. Now they're talking about 4,000 to 5,000 pounds. Let's assume these two people are ultimately linked to this and they are arraigned on these charges. Do you believe it's possible that they could have committed this crime alone, or do you think that there might have been a conspiracy of individuals who may have shared their view, whether they were militia or not?
It's not likely that they did it alone, but I would say that it is very likely that they did it with a much smaller network than we might imagine. One of the lessons from the militant action we had in the 1980s, the armored car robberies, the assassination of the Jewish talk show host here in Denver, and other things, one of the lessons was to be smarter, be smaller, keep it to yourself. I think the tactics will be shown to have improved greatly over the 1980s.
Well, but let me bring Russ back in on that point, though. Russ, listen, this van was rented from a town in Kansas, I believe, which was a meeting place for, among others, the Michigan militia when they met with other militia leadership around the country. Now, I guess you can assume that that was just, you know, a circumstance, but don't you think that raises some questions about whether these guys were in fact connected?
Well, I believe it does. You're right. But I think you can be a member of several organizations, the Posse Comitatus and some of the other historically violent underground type groups, and still be in the Michigan militia. The groups you're talking about embrace the book that Mr. Barnes was referring to a few minutes ago, in which they advocated an unrelenting campaign of violence, and that even involved putting a bomb on an aircraft and bombing the Pentagon. So there's no, I don't think there's any end to the violence as they see it. They envision a continued conflict and confrontation.
Kevin Flynn, what you know about these groups, do you think we're seeing the beginning of an offense by others, or is the enormity of this so big that it may actually force them to pull back?
Well, I think that the enormity, the breadth of this movement is such that there will be more violence committed, but by people on the fringe. Bob Fletcher from the Montana militia told me this afternoon that if they had had foreknowledge of this, that it would never have happened, that they would have moved in, they would have turned the fellows in themselves.
Do you believe him? Do you believe him?
Take it for what it's all propaganda.
Let me ask Victoria.
The act itself is propaganda of the deed.
Victoria, what is not being done now by the FBI and other authorities that needs to be done to curb these groups and make sure we don't have another Oklahoma City?
Well, we're never going to do that. I mean, the very fact that you ask that question, that is impossible any more than you're ever going to prevent someone from getting cancer or having a car accident. There will be, in a free democracy, the opportunity for certain people just getting together in a group of 4 or 5 persons to commit these kinds of evil acts.
Well, that's not very reassuring.
We're going to have to go. Victoria Tunzi, thank you very much. Russ Bellant in Detroit, thank you for being with us. And Kevin Flynn in Denver, thank you very much. Thanks. Fred and I will be back, and we're going to discuss the future of right-wing militias.
Some women saw that little AIDS boy down near Peterson's yesterday. You just keep a safe distance.
What's a safe distance?
I warned you what would happen if you got dirty again.
What is it?
She's afraid that they might not find a cure in time.
Not measles, not chickenpox, AIDS.
The Cure, rated PG-13, now playing at a theater near you.
Most people know us as the inventors of a wonder drug, but we also help make fabrics stronger, homes more energy efficient, animals healthier. And we're helping to lead the way in biotech research.
So much good we can do for each other. Oh, what a world it can be.
Bayer. In healthcare, chemicals, and imaging technologies, we cure more headaches than you think.
You know why more and more people who own home computers are buying their software and stuff at Office Depot? You just can't beat the savings.
Taking care of business.
Need software for your home computer? Office Depot has tons of titles in education and entertainment at everyday low prices that are guaranteed. It's all here. Computer accessories, joysticks and game cards, and all sorts of multimedia upgrades. Me, I like to play with the mice.
Taking care of business. Put me down.
What if we got a hill and made it snow?
Audi Quattro, all-wheel drive, all the time, transfers power to the wheels with the most traction.
Wait, no, scratch the snow. Keep the hill and get something really slippery.
So Quattro goes places the Mercedes C280 and BMW 325i, even with traction control, never dreamed. And it goes there for less.
Nah, they'd never believe it.
Audi Quattro from 27,170 from the soul of Audi.
Look what's popping up for spring. It's Sears Days. You'll find many of our lowest prices of the season, but it only lasts 11 days. Come to Sears Days.
Only Embassy Suites hotels give you a suite with 2 big rooms, a free cook-to-order breakfast, and evening beverages on the house. Because only Embassy Suites is twice the hotel. Call 1-800-EMBASSY.
Saturdays on CNN, there's a new lineup of programs to start your weekend with the latest news plus helpful and informative features. Then find out what's happening in showbiz this weekend. Elsa Clench brings style to the world of fashion and interior design. And our world is explored on Science and Technology Week. All from the people who cover your world. CNN.
For a transcript of this and many other CNN programs, call Journal Graphics at 1-800-CNN-NEWS.
You know, Fred, we ought to stress again, the Michigan militia or any militia has not been associated with this crime. They, in fact, deny knowledge of it, and neither are these 2 suspects now been identified as members yet. So, having said that, though, it is clear that these militias are active, they are angry, and they are armed. They also are the people who keep pushing for the repeal of gun control laws. After you look at what happened in Oklahoma City, you listen to these people's agenda, it's the last people you ought to put guns in the hands of.
Well, look, sure, I agree with that. But also, you know, you acted like these people are actually making gun control more likely. Well, nobody said they were good politicians, that's for sure, and they obviously aren't. But look, Bob, one thing is clear that we learned from all our guests, and particularly from Victoria Tunsing, and that is the FBI has been shackled. It has been inhibited in surveilling and infiltrating these groups. If President Clinton is serious in saying that we will not tolerate further things like Oklahoma City, he needs to unshackle the FBI.
Yeah, we got our rights, though. The Constitution. From the left, I'm Bob Beckel. Good night for Crossfire.
From the right, I'm Fred Barnes. Join us again next time for another edition of Crossfire, and join my buddy Bob on Sunday Crossfire.
This is the place for lively conversation with top newsmakers and celebrities and your phone calls. This is CNN.
Number one, it makes the phone ring, which is important. We spend a lot of money to do that every month. Number two, it reaches a much broader market than our normal advertising vehicles. And number three, it's very affordable.
The advertising cost, comparing it to other advertising, is just a lot cheaper, and it reaches more people.
Because it reaches other clients outside the area, other customers, and it already worked for us.
When you're injured and you need a lawyer, ask them if they represent insurance companies. We don't. Ask if they're on retainer with a large corporation. We're not. And ask if they'll represent hospitals. We won't. You see, people are our only concern and our only clients. So call us. There's no obligation. We're Cephalo & Associates, the people's law firm, and we like it that way.
best judges are lawyers who've tried the most cases and know the law. Over 20 years, Mark Chivarella has been an effective courtroom attorney who's been involved in thousands of cases. He's fought for hundreds of injured victims and threatened citizens. As case by case, Mark Chivarella has mastered the law, sharpening skills you expect in a judge. Now he's ready to use that experience as Luzerne County Judge. Tough, competent, and independent, Mark Chivarella, a judge to protect all of us.
It's the most ambitious remodeling project in American history. And you can be among the first to see the results. Because in the past 12 months, Chevrolet has introduced more new cars and trucks to America than anyone.
Come in and see the all-new Chevy Lumina with standard features you won't find on any other car in its class. And Lumina's priced at just $16,295.
Come see the newest line of cars and trucks in America. Only at your Chevy dealer's open house.
See your local Chevrolet Geo dealer today.
This is CNN.
The man charged in Wednesday's bombing of a federal building is bombarded with the rage of a furious crowd.
His arrest tops a pivotal day in the investigation into the most deadly terrorist attack on U.S. soil. Good evening, I'm Lyndon Souls.
And I'm Kathleen Kennedy. Welcome to this special report of the Oklahoma bombing. But first, we have this just into CNN. Federal authorities have thwarted an effort to release sarin, the deadly nerve gas that was recently released in the Tokyo subway system. 2 Japanese men were apparently planning to release the gas at Disneyland over the Easter weekend, and authorities have thwarted that effort. We'll have more on the story, and that, I'm told, is according to the Boston newspaper. We'll have more on this story as we get information in.
Now shifting to the developing story in Oklahoma City, the developments all day long have been both swift and dramatic. 1 suspect is arrested, 2 men are questioned, and a paramilitary organization is scrutinized. First, a look at the man arrested. You'll soon get a glimpse of 27-year-old Tomothy McViegh as he arrived at Tinker Air Force Base. There in Oklahoma City, he was formally charged with the bombing that killed at least 62 people. Court documents suggest that McViegh may have targeted the U.S. government to avenge the deadly standoff at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas. The bombing came on its 2nd anniversary. According to those court documents, a former co-worker of Tim McVeigh's reported to the FBI that he had seen the composite drawing of unsub number 1, which means unidentified subject, and recognized the drawing to be a former co-worker, Tomothy McViegh. He further advised that McViegh was known to hold extreme right-wing views, was a military veteran, and was particularly agitated about the conduct of the federal government at Waco, Texas in 1993. In fact, the co-worker further reports that McViegh had been so agitated about the deaths of the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas on April 19, 1993, that he had personally visited the site. After visiting the site, McViegh expressed extreme anger at the federal government and advised that the government should never have done what it did. Less than an hour and a half after the explosion, McViegh was arrested in Perry, Oklahoma, about 60 miles from the bomb site. He was stopped on a traffic violation and arrested when an alert officer noticed a weapon under his jacket. Local police contacted federal investigators because of McVeigh's resemblance to a composite drawing of one of the bombing suspects. Police in riot gear raided this farm near Decker, Michigan, and questioned its owner, James Nichols. His brother, Terry Nichols, surrendered in Kansas and is also being questioned in the case. Sources tell CNN that the 2 brothers and McViegh are believed to be members of the Michigan Militia, a paramilitary group. The group's president, however, denies knowing the men. Neither of the brothers is under arrest.
The FBI is here to follow an investigation and to try to get some evidentiary material that may be related to the case and to pursue some leads. There are no groups being sought out or memberships of groups such as the Michigan Militia, such as any organization, Posse Comitatus or skinheads or anybody that the the FBI is focusing on. Okay, that is in error. There have been some reports out that specifically think that the FBI is targeting Michigan militia, and that's not true.
Justice for these killers will be certain, swift, and severe. We will find them, we will convict them, and we will seek the death penalty for them.
I remind everyone that John Doe number 2 remains at large. He should be considered armed and extremely dangerous. There is a strong likelihood that other persons are involved in this tragedy as well. People should not attempt to take any action against John Doe number 2 or anyone else involved in this matter. But we continue to urge anyone with information to call 1-800-905-1514.
And in just a few moments, we will go live to Oklahoma City for the latest.
We have some close-up pictures for you now of the slow and difficult rescue efforts still underway at the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City.
And this videotape was provided to us by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA. These pictures don't really need any explanation. The sweat and the strain of these crews speaks volumes.
Yeah, right there. Pick it up a man. Right there.
The search for survivors at the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City is a tedious, emotionally draining task, and rescuers have been at it for more than 2 days now. CNN's Bonnie Anderson joins us live from the bombing site with an update. Bonnie?
Well, as you said, the search does continue, but right now there are some very high winds, and there is some concern that they might have to call off the search for a short while in case the winds indeed jeopardize the safety of the workers. Now, the death toll continues to climb tonight. Officially, there are 65 people dead, although 4 more bodies have been found in a building across the street from the federal building, 3 of them in a basement restaurant and another one in an office building just above. But until these bodies are removed, they are not being counted in part of the official death toll. The same applies, of course, to the scores of bodies that are still inside the federal building. Now, while much of the focus has turned to the search for and arrest of suspects, many people here are still dealing with their personal grief and are still very deep in mourning. Earlier today, I spoke with one family that is mourning the death of 2 of its youngest.
3-year-old Chase Smith and his baby brother Colton were like so many other young children. They had fun at the zoo and at the beach. They enjoyed the daycare center at the federal building in Oklahoma City, but most of all, they loved spending holidays with their family. In this home movie, celebrating Easter 3 days before the bombing.
Chase he was always real funny. He was like a comedian. He was always dancing and acting silly and telling jokes, and all of the other children at the daycare loved him. They all thought he was really neat. He always took care of Colton. He would hug him and put his arms around him and go, isn't he precious, isn't he sweet, and
A good big brother.
Yeah.
How important are these memories to you?
Very. It's all I have left. Everywhere I walk in here, from just opening my bathroom drawer, and there's sparkle toothpaste. And there's sandbox in the backyard.
23-year-old Edie Smith and her mother, Kathy Graham Wilburn, both work at the Internal Revenue Service office 5 blocks from the federal building. The last time Edie saw her boys alive was when she dropped them off at daycare.
I was walking out the door, and I turned around to try to get Colton to give me a kiss, and I leaned down and said, "Give me a kiss." He said, "No." And so I pretended to cry, and I turned around, and he goes, "Kiss, kiss." So I gave him a kiss, and then he kissed me again, and he got little donut crumbs on my face. I wiped those off, and Chase was in the floor playing, and I gave him a kiss. He gave me a hug, and he told me, he said, "I love you, Mommy." And then I turned around and I walked out.
A short while later, they heard the explosion and ran the 5 blocks to the federal building.
When the car started exploding, we started running around there again. When we got around to the side, we saw the whole building gone.
What went through your mind at that point?
That the babies were gone. Yeah. And I knew they were dead. She crumbled. The babies, they're gone, they're gone.
That afternoon, the boys' mangled bodies were identified by Edie's brother, a police officer. Authorities have refused to release them for burial, so the funeral has been postponed.
They had so much to live for. I'll never get to kiss them or hug them again. I won't get to go to Chase's dance recital in June. It was his first dance recital.
Without the boys' future to look forward to, family members are looking back with some regret.
And sometimes Colton, he would talk in his sleep, and his bedroom is right next to mine, and I think, will I ever get to sleep all night again? Now it's just not important. There's a lot of things you wish that you could go back and change. I would tell anybody who has kids, they need to tell them every day how much they love them. You did. They need to hug them and kiss them. You can never do that too much.
What do you want to happen to whoever is arrested or convicted, let's say convicted of this?
What goes through my mind? I mean, I wonder if they have children of their own. And if they do, how could they do this? I don't wish for anybody to die, but I think that's what they deserve.
Chase and Colton's bedroom is the same as they left it Wednesday morning. At times, it is a warm source of fond memories that can ease their mother's pain, if only for a few moments.
We used to come in here and dump out every toy in the place. Everything would be just everywhere.
But the grief is never far behind.
It's hard. I mean, what do? Do you leave the room like this? Do you take all their pictures down? Do you give their clothes away? You don't know what to do. I mean, what do you do when people ask you, do you have children? What do you say? Well, I did have children. My children are dead. What do you say? You don't know what to say.
The tears of a very heartbroken mother. Nothing else needs to be said. I'm Bonnie Anderson, CNN, reporting live from Oklahoma City.
A sad, sad story. Thanks, Bonnie. Now, some details on our top story. Now, on the foiled terrorist plot at Disneyland we told you about at the top of the hour. A published report says U.S. federal agents prevented the release of a deadly gas attack by a Japanese cult at the California park during the Easter weekend. The report comes from the Baltimore Sun. The paper says the plot was uncovered when federal authorities stopped 2 Japanese men at Los Angeles International Airport 2 days before Easter. The men reportedly had written instructions on how to make the toxic gas sarin. Tokyo police had reportedly alerted FBI agents about the possibility of the attack. The men are allegedly members of the same Japanese cult suspected of releasing sarin in the Tokyo subway system. That attack killed 12 people and sent thousands to hospitals last month. And that story is again comes from the Baltimore Sun.
And when we come back, more on the Oklahoma City bombing. Please stay with us.
Here's a question for you. You know who sells 1 out of every 8 fax machines sold in America? Office Depot.
Taking care of business.
Office Depot has thousands of business machines at guaranteed low prices. Copiers from Canon and Xerox, calculators and organizers. Everything from machines that print labels to machines that take messages. Maybe someday they'll have a machine that does commercials. Nah.
Taking care of business.
My advice to you is get a prelude.
They started by shipping tires in 1930 and have been moving steadily ever since. Today, they ship cargo to all 50 states and 74 countries worldwide. And with an annual revenue of over $4 billion, Roadway Services is one of the few select companies in the Dow Jones Transportation Average. Where do you find companies that keep moving, moving, moving? Actually, there's a list of them printed every day. NASDAQ, the stock market for the next 100 years.
Weekends on CNN, there's a world of living. We turn our spotlight on the best entertainment. Take positive steps to help you lead a healthy life. Open your eyes to top fashion and design. Explore new wonders and ways of living. A world of programs to discover from the people who cover your world. Saturday on CNN.
A live picture of the Alfred P. Murrah building in downtown Oklahoma City. And buildings such as that, damaged or destroyed in the bombing, can always be repaired or rebuilt.
But it's not that easy with the human lives that were torn apart as well. Here's CNN's John Holloman in Oklahoma City.
Across the street from Oklahoma City's federal building is a YMCA. Like the Murrah building, it was heavily damaged by Wednesday's blast. Windows blown out, part of the ceiling came down, and like the federal building, it too had a daycare center. Inside, 8 infants and about 40 older children. Also at the Y, Dan Hunt, a hairdresser, was cleaning up after a morning workout. He stumbled out and saw babies being carried out of the daycare center.
Took 2 children at a time, placed them on the carpet, went back and got the next